Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Red Circle. Also, the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, and turn the notifications on. Also, check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network. That includes the sponsor of this episode, Prize Picks. Use the code 5, F-I-V-E. Get that initial deposit matched up to $100. Of course, you can play the NBA when it starts, but right now it's NFL, it's MLB still going on. NHL is starting soon. You can play all of it. You can mix the sports. This is the official fantasy sponsor of the Five Reasons Sports Network, and it is legal in the state of Florida. That's right. It is legal in the state of Florida. Use the code 5, F-I-V-E. Get that initial deposit matched up to $100. PrizePicks.com. And now, today's episode.
Down to Biscayne.
Yikes. 5 on the floor, ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing, you can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing rubber frauds. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing, got it all banned. Y'all seen the block, stop with one hand. And Pat we trust, it's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat, y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, and Alex Toledo, plus others from the Five Reasons Sports Network.
All right, welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I got Alex Toledo. Follow him at Tropical Blanket. We got Greg Sylvander. You can follow him at Greg Sylvander. Make sure you check out all of the other episodes that are up. We've posted interviews with everybody. Most recently, Kevin Love and Drew Peterson. I had about 15 minutes with Kevin Love today. That's my favorite interview we've posted so far. I thought Kevin was really introspective about his career, going all the way back to the Minnesota days, but also particularly the Cleveland days, what he's trying to accomplish now, and just a lot of respect for kind of where his perspective is right now and what he wants to add to this Heat team. So check that out. Also, other episodes, Caleb Martin and Haywood Highsmith on one episode. We did an episode, of course, with Josh Richardson, and pretty much every hopeful has been on there. And today, obviously, we're going to get into, we'll talk about it in a second, but one of the possible point guard prospects on this team. But what we're going to comment on, RJ Hampton, but what we're going to get into here is Erik Spoelstra made kind of a throwaway comment today, but it's a topic we've touched on at times, which is, he flat out said, we think we're deeper than we were last year. And that then got aggregated. And it was interesting to see the replies, because it does seem that a lot of Heat fans have come around to that while the rest of the nation is laughing about it. And actually, that's kind of a comfortable place to be for Heat fans, because typically the Heat's players are better than the rest of the world gives them credit for, until, of course, they leave the Heat. And then they become better at that point. So if that's where we're at, it's not too bad. But anyway, we have discussed this before, and I agree with Spoelstra. Okay. It does not mean that I think they're championship contenders as presently constituted, particularly with the improvements that teams like Phoenix and Milwaukee in particular have made. But I think the roster is better, guys. Like, I think there's one spot on the roster that is a problem, but I think the other 4 positions are upgraded. Actually, if you don't want to do the positionless thing, and they're certainly better in the front court. And I'm going to set the stage here by just reminding people who is in camp last year and who's in camp now. Okay. So the 2 primary players who were in camp last year that are not there now are Max Strus and Gabe Vincent. Remember, they did not break camp as starters. Okay. So I'm just trying to bring everybody back to that, because the national dialogue is the Heat lost 2 starters. Yes, they lost 2 players who started a lot of games in the playoffs, but they did not necessarily lose 2 guys who were penciled in as starters. In fact, one of their starters, Tyler Hero, who was in camp last year, so I'm not going to count him as an addition, but he is an addition from the playoffs. Okay, he would have been the starting 2 guard in the playoffs. He started the playoffs as the starting 2 guard. Okay, but let's just say Strus, Vincent gone, Oladipo gone, who was more promise than reality. Obviously, everybody feels bad for what happened to Vic, but there were only short stretches that he really provided significant contributions for the Heat during his time, 2+ seasons, right? Okay. Omer Yurtseven made no contribution. There were hopes for him going into last training camp. He had high hopes for himself, kind of talked a little bit too much for their taste, didn't play enough defense. Then he got hurt and was never really a factor again. Dwayne Dedmon was cooked, okay? first 3 months of the season, if you had just simply took him out of the rotations, they probably win 5 or 6 additional games, right? I'm not going to count Cody Zeller because he wasn't there at the beginning of last year, but obviously that was an uneven thing. Now, who's in? Kevin Love was not there camp last year. He's now in what he told me sort of the leanest shape of his life. He's gotten in heat shape. You've added back Josh Richardson. You've added Jaime Jaquez. You've added Thomas Bryant. You have Nikola Jovic, who's a totally different person, not just physically, where he's added 20 pounds, but as Jimmy said, he's acting, he's got his chest puffed out. He's joking around with us and cursing. He was a timid little kid a year ago. Now he's at least finished high school. As Kevin Love made the point, if you listen to the podcast, he was giving him a hard time about that. He says, I'm not going to listen to somebody who just graduated high school because he's kind of mentoring Jovic. So again, you've added a potentially productive Jovic, a rookie in Jaquez who looks like he could be plug and play. We'll see. Hero's back, but again, I'm not going to count that one. Richardson, Thomas Bryant. You've lost Gabe and Max and Dedman and Yurtsevin and Oladipo. I think the roster is better in terms of depth. Am I wrong, Greg?
No, not at all. I think they're definitely deeper. I think where fans are hung up is that they're not deeper if you're just counting superstars. That's the issue here, as everyone wanted to be one deeper as it relates to stars with Jimmy Bam and one more, right? So I guess for me, though, even though the team is deeper, the front court is unquestionably deeper. They definitely have more interchangeable pieces throughout the roster. The more you look at like Jaquez, Jovic, Highsmith, like I could see all those guys being interchangeable in different ways. Obviously, they all play completely differently, but it's just about having guys with similar size, similar length that you can kind of plug in and do different things with. So that is a thing that was not as fluid on the roster. I feel like guys fit in boxes last year, whereas now you have a little bit more of like the utility knife players. The other part about this year is that I think clearly defined roles are going to help. Obviously, the point guard role, let's just put that aside because maybe they're going to just do that by committee. Who needs a point guard? Maybe that's Greg's old way of thinking. I still think it's yet to be determined. Are they deeper with people who can guard at the point of attack? Are they deeper with enough shooters that are going to be on people's scouting reports for anyone to give a shit? Are they deeper in getting into the paint, finishing, and basically putting enough pressure on the rim to make all this work? Are they deeper in all those ways? They may be, because Gabe Vincent and Max Strus were not guys that they were counting on to do certain things that they ended up doing in the playoffs. Gabe becoming a pull-up artist, Max having, huge three-point games here and there, timely shots. So who knows who pops, right? But I just think we're still at a spot, even with a deeper team, where they got to shoot well and they got to have some things break their way. And I just think Heat fans wanted maybe a little less margin for error. But all of this, again, remains to be seen. You get one guy that pops or plays above expectations, and it completely changes the calculus on all of it.
Yeah, I mean, Alex, as we talked about it, I mean, the Gabe thing, I think, is what's jumping out to people because that's the position of concern. We heard that in the not scrimmage work, but sort of the intra squad work that they did today, that Lowry was the only guy who looked like a point guard. Which I guess if you're a potential Hall of Famer at the position, that's going to be the case. But the point is, there's really nobody else who would, right? Like, and not at this stage. The young guys are too young, and again, we're gonna have the RJ Hampton interview here, and maybe he's a guy who pops. But Drew Smith, RJ Hampton, and then again, you got guys who are not really point guards like Josh and Tyler, and then Jimmy having to handle and Bam having to handle. But Gabe was not a true point guard either. I just feel like it would make the Heat fan feel more comfortable if he was still here, because we wouldn't be having the conversation really about whether Kyle was starting, because I don't know that Kyle would necessarily be on board with it, but he'd be more on board with it, I would think, if it was a guy like Gabe who had actually been starting in the finals, right? Like, it would just be an extension of last season. And so then it comes back to that decision that, again, you thought you might have a chance at Dame or somebody else. And so you didn't end up giving, Gabe maybe the extra couple of $1 million per year, at least making the initial offer that would have satisfied him and not, turned him to Los Angeles, where, again, the Heat say they offered more over the length of the deal, but it was over an extra season. Is that just what we're talking about here, Alex? Is it just the Gabe thing that has Heat fans saying, "No, we're not"? Because it can't be Strus, and I love Max, but they weren't gonna pay Max, and Duncan can do a lot of the same things as Max, and honestly, did them a little bit better in the playoffs than Max did overall.
Well, look, it's there's a lot going on here. They're deep, 100%. They're deeper than last season, 100%. Which is funny because they let two starters walk, which is a semantic thing, right? Because we all know that those guys weren't full time starters 100% of the way, but they were starters for both playoff runs. Got to give them that. You guys know I was left just with a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth with the way it was handled, and we kind of went back and forth about it on playback a little bit. And so, no, I don't think like Gabe and or Max not being on the team keeps them from being deep. They're definitely deep. Um, I just think the situation they have right now isn't necessarily ideal, right? Like I think, like Leif said, he hit on it when he said you want less of a margin for error. So it's like, yeah, you have all these playable bodies, which is great, but you have to figure out a rotation with that, and you can kind of play around it a little bit with some of these guys. Like you mentioned plenty, Ethan, just the idea of having Jovic play Love's minutes throughout the season just to have, kind of Love ready for the playoffs because you don't want to overdo it with him. Just, things with that kind of, concept and logic. I think that's something that they can, it's a workaround, but it's a lot of bodies. It may be, you can make a case that it's too many because guys are going to be left feeling like, hey, I should maybe be playing. And I honestly, I think Leif put it just really well when he was going into the depth stuff there because now you have guys who are in roles. And I think like you look at even the hopefuls, right? They got like Drew Peterson and Cole Swider. They're kind of slotted into roles, but even them, like they're different types of players. They're different types of weapons. And that's not even guys who are putting anywhere near their rotation, right? When you look at the guys who might actually play, they easily have 12 guys. And that's, like I said, before you get into Hampton, Swider, Peterson, or Jamal Cain, any of those types of, young guys who you would like to see play. They have a lot of options. It's just, what do you do with it? And I feel like we had this conversation. I want to say the first season of Jimmy, where they just said they need to consolidate. I think that was I think it was that first season. That might be the move for them, at some point before the trade deadline, just to figure out who works, who doesn't, and what's a luxury, what isn't, and try to consolidate some of this. But I just the Gabe thing definitely does look worse now. I think it's not a world changer, but just the fact that he went to the Lakers for that little money, it isn't a great look after what happened with Dame and all that, and Kyle aging and them wanting to move on from him. I don't think Kyle would have had a problem with Gabe continuing to start. They'll be okay. They'll be fine. But yeah, it would have been nice to have Gabe back.
Yeah, and I think, like we said, I think he would have probably come back if the initial offer had been better, but we can argue about why they're holding back resources there. And some of it, Greg, is just, in this day and age, they have a value to a player and they're only going to move a little bit on that value to a player. But I also do understand the philosophy to a certain degree, and we've talked about it and I can't really have it both ways here, which is that they overpaid for replaceable players, for a long period of time. 16, 17. Alex is rolling his eyes here because we just had this conversation on playback.
Yeah.
But I killed them for 16 and 17 for paying Tyler Johnson, paying Dion Waiters, paying James Johnson after you had all of them on good contracts before. Hassan Whiteside, I didn't kill him for that because I actually liked that decision. That was a major mistake on my part. But you look at those four players in particular, and then Duncan was kind of an extension of that. And then it seems like it's stopped. Now, Max, I don't think that they would have paid under any circumstances that amount of money. And Max got a great situation for him in Cleveland. I was talking to Kevin Love about that today. He actually recommended the Cavs to him. So that ended up working out, to a certain degree for everybody. You wish Max well. And what I was saying too is that when we were talking to some of these guys on media day, the Haywood Highsmiths, right? So he says, I said, where will you be in a year? He says, hopefully I'll have a 3-year contract. Hopefully it'll be here. But now they kind of know that if they're next, whether it's Haywood Highsmith or Orlando Robinson, or maybe it's Jamal Cain, or maybe it's RJ Hampton or whatever, who was hanging out down in Miami and only wanted to join the Heat, right? Like from August on, a former first-round pick, that if they don't get their money from Miami will develop them, that maybe they'll get it elsewhere. And it was we kind of thought it was the opposite for a while. that, other teams wouldn't want Miami's players because they were not as good when they left Miami and, these developmental types. And maybe that continues to prove true. But for right now, two of them just got paid. One of them by the Lakers, one by Cleveland, two contender type teams. They got decent money from both of them. And so that's another incentive to bring guys to Miami. Now, you don't necessarily have to be the team to pay them, but you can get them paid. And
They know that
so,
if you play a
and
role
maybe
and thrive in
maybe
that
you don't
role,
pay them.
that's the thing. They know
What's that?
you can thrive in that role and get paid.
Yeah.
I think that's what it comes down to.
And so here's the crazy thing, right? Because everyone got mad at them retaining their own players, and then they have kind of gone in the other direction with Max and Gabe. And
That's
truthfully,
exactly what we were talking about on playback.
if we're really gonna tout the developmental system and the culture, and everyone's gonna just shudder when I say the word heat culture, but if we're really going to tout that, because it you can't deny that there's something there, right? Then it doesn't make sense for them to continue to invest in guys when they can maybe, I'm going to use this word, even though I hate using it for human beings, like manufacture the same player and the same role that can have the same impact. The next step to this for the Heat is going to be trying to figure out and have the discernment of which guys to let walk and which guys to keep. And when you have a value in the marketplace where it makes sense to maybe push a little extra to keep a guy like Gabe, because in hindsight, he's now coming off the bench and he probably would rather be starting in Miami for the other contract. I bet you can't get in his head, but I just think that that's the discernment that I think it's hard, right? It's going to be hard.
You know what? This is where it bothers me. And it's good that we disagree on stuff like this, because I feel like we all agree with each other like 97% of the time. But this is where I get frustrated. And like I said, we talked about it on playback, but I think this, I was going to say it's good for a podcast, but we're already doing it right now. So basically what I feel like it's a theme, this overcorrection, right? Ever since, 16 and 17 and these years that we cite where like they sign these players. The problem is I wish it was the other way around. And I was saying this on playback, like, you would want them to pay the guys who stepped up for you in your winning windows and, your big playoff runs, and not the guys who were just, good players for you on 8th or 9th seed, those middling transition years. Like, I feel like the overcorrection for them, and they even made one of those types of signings with Duncan. Like a lot of people throw Duncan into that kind of category, and that was in the Jimmy era. So I understand them trying to not repeat mistakes. And I definitely understand it with Max, because I think Max got a really big contract. With everything they know about their financials, I think Max was not going to come back. Not to mention Duncan is still there making a lot of money and in a almost exact same role. So that's a different story. But the theme of letting guys walk, and not just guys, it's guys who really step up for you in playoff runs. That's the part that I don't like, because I 100% they have one of the best development systems. They're going to make something out of relative nothings. No shade out of to any of the guys that are there that we've been talking to. It's nothing like that, but just like they turn guys into players, and that's great. But to me it's not so black and white where it's like you either only develop guys and don't pay anybody, or you go the complete other way. Like, to me, a Caleb who stepped up and played huge for you in the playoffs, if he does it again and shows and repeats something like that or something close to that, you pay that guy. To me, Gabe, for the way that he's played in 2 straight playoffs, you pay that guy considering what he got. I'm not saying you go and give him everything, but $33 million for Gabe, you retain that guy considering your only other point guard is 37 and you don't want him on the roster anymore. It's like the worst kept secret. And then in the past years, you had PJ walk, you had Jay Crowder walk. These guys are not irreplaceable individually. It's just like, I wish they would, some of these guys that were better for you would have kept, as opposed to some of the guys they did sign.
Alex, there were circumstances for some of them, and PJ, for instance, like, looking back now, there's no way they should have kept him. I mean, there's just no way. I mean,
I guess
with the vehicles that they had to use, if the choice was him or Caleb, which I believe
what was it?
I believe it was.
The elephant in the room is that what we're talking about is that they had the spending capacity to keep both of them if we really want to get down to brass tacks. But are they willing to do that, and is it realistic?
More true with Gabe. But I would say that's more true with Gabe. But let me ask you this, though, because again, sometimes you just need to say goodbye to a guy. Like, I absolutely believe that Haywood Highsmith is going to be more effective for them in the PJ Tucker role this year than PJ Tucker would have been.
That's fine.
That's
But
how I view it, at a much lower cost. So I'm not excusing cheapness. You understand that?
even I said on
I
playback,
agree
like
with
you could
you.
look at it
I
in a way where you're replacing. Sorry to interrupt you, Ethan, but I just thought it like you're replacing your playoff rotation, Gabe and Max, with Josh and
Mhm.
Tyler, and that's like I get there's some backwards kind of logic there because Tyler's been on the roster forever. He's not a new addition, but he wasn't in your playoff rotation not only last year but kind of the year before because of the injury
But aren't
stuff.
you then making our argument then? I don't
No,
understand.
that's what
Like
I'm saying. I understand some of it, but I just feel like I hate the idea of like, oh, I could just grow another one of these guys on trees who is just like an awesome playoff player. Like
they
that makes
have
me
though.
nervous, and it has a tinge of
But
arrogance to me. I don't like that. It
no,
bothers me a
no,
little
but
bit.
it's
Pay
but
your guys.
I don't think it's the only one, like I say, that looks shaky in retrospect, and we'll talk about it more if they can't find somebody to get them in offense, is Gabe, because it seems to be over a couple $1,000,000 this way or that way, and kind of the way that they approached him initially. But again, he wasn't a natural point guard either. So it's kind of like I think the
No,
issue
they don't
is,
need
if
any of
there
these
was a
guys.
guy,
You know,
if there was a guy on the roster, and maybe it's the guy we're talking to in the second half of this episode, if there was a guy on the roster who exhibited some Gabe-like qualities, then I think that we would feel more comfortable with this, but we don't know that they have that. That's the problem. So I think we're really talking about one position. I don't think there's any question they're deeper over the course of the roster. It's point guard. It's the same thing we've been talking about all this time, because, like Greg has said, they were not really expecting Kyle Lowry to be here, and I don't think he was expecting to be here. And now it's like, oh shit, he's the only one here, and
I'm
then you
starting
get
to think
into
this is a
this kind of
non-factor.
situation. What's
The,
that?
the more I think about it, the more I'm starting to think this whole point guard thing is a non-factor. The only thing that I'm taking away from this is that they don't. I mean, yes, like all the stuff of if they trade Kyle Lowry away, there's an obvious hole, right? Because he's the literal only point guard they have in the roster. But like you're saying, Ethan, and like we've talked about on other episodes, Gabe was not the lead guard. The lead
Right.
playmakers on this team are Jimmy, Bam, and then Tyler. And so I just
They
feel like
still are, and they
if
still
if
are.
they
For
trade
me, it's
Kyle,
who
they're
the hell's
probably
going
going
to
to get a
guard.
point guard in return. So it's like I feel like this whole lead guard thing is nothing. I feel like Josh is not that much worse of a dribbler and passer than Gabe, and neither of them were going to be the lead guard anyways. And Josh can go and pull up too. So again, I'm not saying Gabe is irreplaceable. I'm not saying PJ was or Jay Crowder was. It just struck me the wrong way when guys who came up huge, because all three of these guys I'm talking about were absolutely huge for you in these long playoff runs, are the guys who they end up letting walk. It's just this like when you're in that window, you're that close to winning championships. I feel like those are the guys you pay, and then maybe you try to let some of the others go. I love Duncan, but that's what I'm talking about here. Duncan and Kyle, the guys who haven't worked out, you try to figure out what to do with those mistakes, and then you keep the guys who step up for you. You reward them.
I understand all of that,
Sorry.
but I also want to say one thing. I think they should have offered Gabe more money at the beginning. Obviously, if they'd gotten Dame, we would not even be discussing this. And they didn't, but we can decide who we want to blame for that. I was told again today they weren't going to trade him to us. Okay. It's just that simple. And if that was the case, I don't know how much blame we can throw on them for that. We all agree they should try to at least some degree, right? Because the guy asked out, and it is the position that we're talking about. So, okay. You can say, well, they left themselves unprotected at the position. I guess we'll see. But I tend to agree with Alex's point that they really haven't relied on a traditional point guard in a long time, actually. I mean, Kyle came in, and again, it's been spotty, but Goran wasn't really a traditional lead guard. Mario Chalmers wasn't a traditional lead guard. It's not the way that they've typically done things. I think the overall roster is better. I understand Alex's point that when you're in a championship window, you need to pay people in general. Like, that's what I would say. Like, you need to pay people
The
in
ones who
general.
step up.
But
The ones who step up. That's my
the
thing.
ones who step up, but okay. Gabe and Max stepped up in the playoffs, but not in a regular season that almost ended before it even got to the playoffs, in part because the two of them were not great. Now, Max saved them against Chicago with 31. I understand. He made some he had some big game moments, not in the finals, but he had some big game moments. Gabe had some big game moments, not in the finals so much. Okay, after what was a game one. But and so I understand that if there's guys who've stepped up in the playoffs tell situations, right? The situations that matter, you prioritize those guys, and you're always going to have these young guys at different stages of development. So, like, okay, maybe one of their young point guards is a year or two away from being what Gabe became. But again, Gabe was not that when he got here. And the same with Max, and the same with Caleb. And I really think where this is headed, which is not where I planned for this episode to go, but I'll let Greg close here. I think where this is headed is a Caleb conversation. Like, I think like that's what we're going to end up having as we go forward. But the reality is he's part of the
I'm gonna
depth
save
right
that.
now. But I think that's where we're headed, because then we're going to have this argument, and Alex is going to jump in on this one, and he's going to be right, which is if this team does contend in some way this year,
I'm
somehow,
pre-angry about
some way, if this team does contend in some way, and Caleb is a key factor, either as a starter or a sixth man, but most likely as a closer, and he's a guy who could have been Eastern Conference Finals MVP last year, then yes, I think it's reasonable to say you need to pay that guy and
Exactly.
keep the window going as long as possible. But
no, we
I
grow
don't.
them on thin air. I mean, we grow. It's
No, but I don't think they're as highfalutin as Alex is making them sound. Although I understand where he's coming from. But I'll close with this: if if he mirrors last season in terms of even the peaks and valleys where it ultimately ended up, playoffs tell moments, right? If he has those again, and then you let him just walk out the door, at some point when we're going to have to acknowledge the message that it sends to everyone else who's still around trying their asses off to win a championship. So that's just ultimately then, as we try to put a bow on this,
you don't want to
I
be the
also
Patriots.
would consider you got guys in that foxhole with these guys, whether it's PJ, whether it's Gabe, whether it's Max. These are guys that they're brothers. It's a brotherhood. And I just think at some point, the discernment of who to keep and who not to keep is going to be what makes or breaks the development system, because that's how you keep this value thing rolling. And so it'll be interesting to see how it goes. And Caleb's going to have every opportunity this year. So they're going to find out if he really is that guy or if he is a guy. And so now we'll watch and see.
Well, he looked like more than just a guy in the Eastern Conference Finals last year, and I think he's going to be better this season. So we'll have this argument again. I don't know that we actually argued the topic that we were planning on arguing, but we'll see how people take this. All right, RJ Hampton. He's going to make us all forget, right, about their point guard trouble, right? We're going to come out of this camp and say they got a
First round
former
draft
first
pick.
round pick. They got a guy. But I do want to talk about one of our sponsors before we get to that. Our friends over at Rock Esports Center. That's Rock Esports Center. This is an esports center and lounge. We are going to start doing events there. It's a really cool place. Alex and I went down and checked it out. Head over to Miami's first gaming lounge. Again, it's called Rock Esports Center, to eat, drink, and play all day. You can host your next birthday party with them. But also, like I said, we're going to do watch parties. We're going to do live pods. All kinds of cool stuff here. They're located at 15305 South Dixie Highway in Palmetto Bay. 5,500 square foot state-of-the-art center equipped with the high-end power of industry titans Corsair and Origin PC. They got play all day passes for just $25 and even cheaper rates for less time. So come check it out. Professional level gaming at the most affordable price in town. Use the code, this is our product code, 5RSN for $5 off your first purchase over $20. So again, it's Rock Esports Center in Palmetto Bay. Come check them out and mention 5 reasons, but with the code 5RSN for $5 off your first purchase over $20. Also want to mention Better Edge. Use the code 5RSN there as well. You get $20 to play there. So, hey, get your $20 to play on Better Edge, and then it's only $20 to play all day at Rock Esports Center. See, we combine our stuff here. Go to betteredge.com. This is legal sports betting, and play against others who use it, not against the app or a bookie. That's why it's legal. And now our interview with